We have at least one English-speaking member of the audience today, so we'll do it in English. Thank you everyone for coming. We were 30 people who were supposed to be here today, so you're the cream of the crop. Some of you maybe didn't find it, some of the others, but you're here. My name is Anders Breivik. I work at Knowit as a consultant. We're the hosts here today. Peter is going to do most of the talking. I'd just like to welcome you all, and I'm hoping to start a conversation after Peter has spoken about what this meetup group is going to be all about. And we're hoping that you, the members, will participate and help guide us and find some content for the rest of the meetups.
Yeah.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah. So again, a little bit. My name is Peter Frøystad. I work now at a startup called Bankbridge. Not related to Hyperledger really at all, but this is something that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. Been hoping to start a Hyperledger meetup to try to get people interested. Been a lot of talks regarding the cryptocurrencies, and there's not been a lot of focus on how to actually use blockchain or distributed ledger technology in the enterprise setting. And Hyperledger is the framework that I'm most familiar with, so that's the one I've been wanting to start a meetup about. And the first one, this one, is more of an introduction. It's not really going to be that technically heavy. It's more of an introduction to the Hyperledger project itself and the various frameworks and tools that are incorporated into Hyperledger. So I'm planning to start a bit with what Hyperledger is, what the vision is, and then go into different framework and tool, what they're used for, and how generally the project is moving forward. So just to start with some numbers, Hyperledger is a relatively recent project, and if you at least think in traditional software terms, in blockchain years, 2 years since launch is quite a long time. But it's been growing momentum. When I started getting interested in Hyperledger, there was basically only Hyperledger Fabric available, and it was in version 0.6. Now there's 2 versions, 1.0 production releases, code bases, and some other frameworks, or 3 other frameworks and 5 tools that are in what I call incubation stage. There's 10 active community working groups, including a healthcare working group, financial working group, and supply chain working group. Those are the 3 biggest ones. There's some other related to identity management and other things. And there's about 34K members across 130 plus meetups. Oslo is then, I think, still the most recent one, not even on the map here yet. There's also been one started in Copenhagen and one in Stockholm as well. So they're all loosely affiliated with Hyperledger. To start this meetup was basically just to have a conversation with the program director of Hyperledger. So generally, of course, Hyperledger is a part of the Linux Foundation. So I guess most software developers, at least in some case, have a relationship with the Linux Foundation, which is, of course, an open source community. And that's why they wanted to put Hyperledger as an open source blockchain project, where you could create enterprise-grade, open source, distributed ledger and blockchain frameworks and code bases. There's also the goal that it should be community-driven and generative and neutral. It's easier to avoid a lot of the politics regarding, well, the coins and the government-related when that's not really the focus. And of course, there's some education related to this, meetups like this, and there's also new certificates and courses you can take. There's one, at least I've taken, which is free through Education X, which is an introduction to Hyperledger, so that could be cool to go through if you want. So I just want to start just generally a bit about the vision. I've talked a bit about it already, but generally, if we compare it to the web, which a lot of people do, we're still quite in the early stages. like we've said it now for 2 years that we're in the early stages, but these type of maturation cycles take time. It might take anything from 10 to 30 years until the technology is properly mature and people actually know what to do with it. We're still quite in the early stages if you compare it with cloud technology, for example, where people just say blockchain and it means everything or it means nothing. But there are some commercial blockchain stacks being built. And we have, of course, the split between the permissionless and the permissioned blockchain. At least that is the current split, as we call them, where permissionless is what you associate with things like Ethereum, Bitcoin, EOS is a new one. Basically set up that it should be one global chain where everybody should be able to participate in it. Permissioned blockchain is what we also can call enterprise blockchains or private blockchains, where they're trying to make more blockchains that will be used in a specific setting. So in the Hyperledger vision, it's not supposed to be one global chain to rule them all. It's more about providing open source frameworks that will be used in, for example, one blockchain per industry, for example, or even more likely, specific blockchain deployments in different countries, but they would need some degree of interoperability between it. And that's also one of the reasons why Hyperledger was created, to provide these open source tools and frameworks that can be used worldwide. There's still a lot of research effort going on. We definitely need more insight into consensus mechanisms, more choices for just smart contract platform, and also the right identity models. How do you identify yourself on a blockchain? So how Hyperledger is set up, it's of course in under the Linux Foundation, so it's free open source, but it's maintained or funded through membership basically. There's premier members and just normal community members that donate a certain amount of money each year. But of course, those are for marketing purposes, at least what I feel like. You don't really need to pay a dime to use it or even contribute to it. Then you have the 5 frameworks out of 3 which are now active, what they call out, and the other 2 are still in incubation phase. And there are also 5 different tools, as they call it, which all are still in incubation phase. We'll go through each of these today and just give the short introduction about what they're built for, what specific purpose, and at least for some 3 of the frameworks, I will give an example of how they're used in the industry. And of course, if anyone wants to ask any questions or anything during this, just feel free. So just interrupt me at any time. So the one last slide for the vision is just what is actually the technical scope here. What is Hyperledger, the frameworks, actually meant for? And if you can see here what is actually in scope, it's a lot. But more importantly, what is not in scope is the custom applications and the general app layer. So what these frameworks are for is to create the core APIs, the ledgers themselves, and the framework surrounding them, and all the services that are needed to actually create a working blockchain, such as membership policies, core APIs, code executions, all those things. So let's get started. Hyperledger Fabric might be the most famous one out of this, at least the first code base that was ever contributed. And it was contributed by IBM and Digital Assets. In it, it's basically a smart contract-based platform. It shares some early similarities with Ethereum, but it has diverged quite a bit. But it's built around smart contract execution. In Fabric, they are generally called chain code and are written in Golang. They are deployed across multiple nodes, where each node requires certain membership services to validate themselves, and then run in secure Docker containers. The idea here is that you should be able to bring your own membership service provider, and that basically means that in different countries, there might be different ways they want to deploy the networks. If you want to build a government-based ledger, for example, you might need a quite strict membership service provider. But you might also need something similar to how DNS, the DNS system works today, that you maybe need a global or at least regional membership providers that can give out the certificates necessary to either become a validator node itself or just a member of the network. In generally, version 1.1 was actually released quite recently. And in that version 1.0, they added a lot of new functionality, a lot of focus on performance and scale. Because in generally, one of the biggest, still technical challenge in all of blockchain is the performance and scale improvements that are necessary. Ethereum, they are trying to move forward with proof of stake and sharding to basically allow more transactions per second is what it boils down to. But of course, there's other considerations. In Hyperledger, the networks are generally smaller. They're not based around a global chain like Ethereum is. So the performance and scale are more focused around the consensus mechanism itself and the hardware it will run on. So even though IBM has given away the code base, they're still, of course, selling it as IBM blockchain, and they're trying to sell it together with their cloud services or even their hardware services. And one other cool thing that was added actually recently was what they call private channel data. We can go back here in a little bit, where you say that they want to create channels for sharing confidential information. Because that's one of the main limitations of creating a business enterprise blockchain, was that all data that is put on a blockchain, at least generally, is shared to every other member of the network. And they started seeing, when they started making the necessary requirement engineering, was that you can't, in all cases, the members don't want to share all data with each other. They used the example, for example, in the supply chain tracking, that it's very necessary for the members to agree on where the container is on the global oceans, but they might not want all the other members to know the price that was agreed upon between the two main parties. So that's why they started creating what they call secret channels, where you can basically create a separate side channel or side ledger where parties can agree on some information that just those two parties need to know. And the other parties are not privy to this information. There's still some challenges in regards to that technology. They haven't really figured out how to scale it to a major so that you can run thousands of channels at the same time. They are running out of memory in some of the early tests that I at least was checking out. So it was good for smaller use cases again, but once you try to see it on a global scale, then the channels could actually be a bit of a bottleneck. Something that, of course, planned going forward is a lot of UX improvements. There are still a lot of troubles in generally just figuring out how to interact with the blockchain, how to make it understandable for the developers and the end users. And there's a lot of focus also, how can we actually do ledger archiving or pruning? Because again, they imagine that it comes to a certain point that the ledger will just grow in size. And you need to figure out, how can we actually prune this? Are there transactions that can go in cold storage, basically? They're not necessary to keep in memory, but the transactions that are here are relevant to make the history of the ledger, but they're maybe not necessary to keep in hot storage. And one other thing they're also working on, of course, is zero knowledge proofs. I don't know if people are familiar with that. It's a really cool technological concept where basically you're trying to create a situation where two people want to share information, they're trying to share an answer to a question, basically. And we'll come back to it a bit later in the identity example. But there's you want to prove that you're older than 21 years old, but you don't want to actually say how old you are. And that's something that you can create a zero-knowledge proof of, that basically mathematically guarantees that you give the correct answer or the truthful answer, but the person you're giving the answer to doesn't actually know all the information. I'll come back a bit about to zero-knowledge proofs. So example of actually a successful Fabric deployment is what WeTrade has created. It's basically some of the world's biggest banks that are created this global trade consortium, and together with a startup, HSBC, Rabobank, and some others, trying to make an international trading system. The idea was that generally supply chain finance has been very difficult to achieve. There's been, of course, it's been largely paper-based, but there's been trouble to accurately monitor, store, and make available all the information related to a trade. It's how you track it, how the risk is covered, and stuff like that. So basically what they've created is a system where the parties that are involved in global trade can update one shared ledger with the information regarding each trade. And they at least say that this system that they've built is quite scalable, and it's supposed to be able to handle global scale and the actual scale that global trade is at today. The second framework, and the second one that was contributed to Hyperledger, is called Hyperledger Sawtooth, contributed by Intel. And it's quite an interesting deployment in the way that it's meant to support both permission and permissionless deployments. It includes a new consensus algorithm, which I call proof of elapsed time, which is actually shares some similarities to proof of work in the way that it's what they call Nakamoto-style consensus, where similar to how mining, you basically waste a lot of power, but through that you gain through almost like a lottery function that you're allowed to create a new block. They simulate that in proof of elapsed time, where the different providers around, they basically enter a very specific lockdown of the core system called Intel SGX, which mimics the proof of work but without the energy consumption. And you can also create blocks faster than you can with some other proof of work based systems. But of course, the one I would say downside to this consensus algorithm is that it relies on Intel technology, Intel SGX. So of course, this is becoming quite common in Intel's processors. Everything from Skylake architecture and going forward comes with this by default. But it also means that everything from AMD or other chip processors won't really be able to use this, at least at the moment. They say that they're building some simulation or simulated environments for this. But yeah, they haven't really done that yet. But yeah, and one other thing that they built quite recently with this was that the support for the Ethereum virtual machine, which they call Seth, which basically allowed to create solidity contracts and base them in a Hyperledger Sawtooth network. And but it would run using the proof of elapsed time consensus algorithm, and you could run it on a Hyperledger Sawtooth based system. Sorry, it's just something is a bit weird here. 2 seconds. Hva er det som skjer nå? Ser ut som at PC-en streiker litt. Ja, hvis du kan bare gjøre klar din. Jeg må bare prøve å Control-Alt-Delete is your friend. Så funker den skjermen der fortsatt. Den skal gå. Nå vil ikke PC-en min koble til opp mot den akkurat nå. Jeg fikk ikke faktisk se noe. Og så når jeg gikk ut, så hang PowerPoint seg opp. Og nå vil ikke PowerPoint igjen, men nå får jeg ikke ta og flytte det over på den andre skjermen. Noe som er litt upraktisk.
Har du gjort mye siden jeg fikk det?
Nei, egentlig ikke. Da flytter vi over den. Eller den Google Drive, ja. Ja, da tar vi og slår over på den. Så. Ja, skal vi se hvordan går du i slideshow-modus her. Eller, det var ikke den jeg sendte. Åja, nei, jeg mente den som jeg sendte deg på Google Drive, hvis du har den på Slack. Dette er en litt eldre versjon. Nå kanskje skjer noe her da. Tror jeg det skjer noe, kanskje. Ja. Nå ser det ut som at det funker her også. Ja, man måtte bare skifte fra PC til Mac og tilbake igjen. Ok. Magical. Where was I? Yeah, I was almost going through Hyperledger Sawtooth. There's a lot of other cool technical features about it. There's something that has actually been sorely missing in some of the earlier blockchain deployment is you can't really change consensus algorithm. You can't really update the system once it's up and running. And that has led to, at least Ethereum needed to hard fork, for example, after the DAO disaster. But what Sawtooth has basically meant that they've separated the core apps and the blockchain itself, meaning that you can run multiple apps on the same blockchain, but easy to deploy an application, take it off, and take it and put it on again. So they've created a lot of streamlining in the way of writing your own contract logic in a language of your own choice. I mentioned that you could write in Solidity, but they've support for a lot of other programming languages as well. And they run what they call dynamic consensus, meaning that a network can be started using proof of elapsed time. But if you actually want to upgrade the network with a new and more efficient consensus algorithm in a year or two, that is actually possible. And there's also been some improvements there that they can actually execute transactions in parallel. Because most blockchains that are in case today, they require serial transaction execution because that's the only way to guarantee that transactions are guaranteed and consistent. But Sawtooth has created a advanced parallel schedule that splits transactions up into parallel flows. And that's one of the things that they managed to do because of their architecture. I remember Vitalik Buterin was talking a bit about that, if that was possible to do in Ethereum. But basically he said that as Ethereum was built right now, that would be impossible. Because again, Ethereum is meant to be run on normal hardware, a computer at home, while Hyperledger Sawtooth is more meant for more bigger data centers, for example, based on Intel technology. But there's a lot of cool technical features in Sawtooth. One example of implementation was from Blockchain Media, creating a music and medium rights platform. Of course, there are several other companies that are trying to do the same. But it's basically creating a system where you can have a register of music content right, and creating a way to commercializing this. So that is something that is sorely needed. A lot of musicians are seeing the trouble in the internet age of actually enforcing the copyright and getting paid for their music and art. So this is one one implementation of that, and that is something I think we'll see in the years to come. This one is quite interesting in the way that it is a standalone blockchain, but it's more a set of libraries, I would say. It's a blockchain framework that is based on C++, and it was initially contributed by Soromitsu, Hitachi, NTT Data, and Kolu. But it's supposed to be a simple and easy way to incorporate these different libraries that they've created into other distributed ledger projects. They've focused a lot on mobile application development so that you can actually create client-side applications much easier than what you can with some of the other frameworks. They basically, when they created this, they saw that Fabric was quite a big and extensive system, and they want to create more modular libraries. And they also created another consensus algorithm that they actually ended up calling yet another consensus algorithm. Though the official name is Sumeragi, but I think the yet another consensus algorithm, the name has actually stuck as well. So they offer some open source libraries for both iOS, Android, and JavaScript to make it more flexible API functions, basically. So I think this might end up the project being more of a tool in going forward, but right now it's also its own standalone blockchain framework. And this one is actually the most recent one project added, Hyperledger Indy, which was contributed by Sovereign Foundation. And the focus has been on getting identities and rooting them on the blockchain itself. So the code base Indy is a software ecosystem for both private, secure, and powerful identity, which is supposed to go from today with the more centralized identity structures where you have things like bank ID, for example, that is like the central authority of identifying people in Norway, while they're trying to create a more decentralized public key infrastructure system. And it's also based around the notion of self-sovereign identity, which is one of the concepts I think that is, at least to me personally, one of the more cooler things that have come out of blockchain technology, where the notion is that you as an individual should be more in control of your own identity, where you make assertions about yourself. The idea here is that you make a claim about yourself and you get someone in a trusted position to assert that claim. So the idea here is that you build up your identity to a set of claims. If you take me personally, for example, I would make, for example, a claim could be my national identity card. That would be one thing. That just says who I am in the eyes of the state. But I could add claims that I have a diploma, for example, from a university. I can add where I live, for example. I can maybe in the future also add information about how I'm that I pay my bills on time. And all these fragments sum up and create your identity. And the idea is here that you only, when you are asked to prove that you are who you claim you are, you only need to provide proofs that fits the situation. Again, with the example I said earlier, if you have your identity card, your national identity card, which is asserted on a blockchain, and I want to get into a bar, I don't need to actually get this identity card out and show it to the bouncer. He doesn't really need to know my name, my address, and where I live. He only really needs to know, am I 20 years or older? So basically what using a blockchain-based system is that then I make the claim, I'm older than 20 years old, and based on this zero-knowledge proofs, again, coming back to that technology, I can prove that I'm older than 20 years old, but you don't actually need to know when I'm born exactly. So it's basically what they call selective disclosure. And it lets the identity owners control how much data that is shared about themselves based on the particular context. So the idea here is that the blockchain itself would serve as a decentralized self-service registry for public keys and what they called DIDs, or decentralized identifiers. And that is something that is a standard that is initiated by the V3C. And it's supposed to be a standard way for both individuals, organization, and even things to create globally unique and cryptographically verifiable identifiers about themselves. So unlike a domain name, IP address, or phone number, a DID is not supposed to be rented from any service provider. It's supposed to be a claim that you make about yourself, and it's supposed to be in your control. Nobody can take it away from you, or if the system goes down, there's still a copy about your identity that is still in your control. So I'm not saying that Hyperledger Indy will be maybe the final solution for this, but they're creating a lot of tools that are making this possible. And I mentioned that this was contributed by the Sovereign Foundation, and they are actually trying to create this, what they call the Global Trust Network, where you're able to create your own identity and use it. There are, though, some other projects in the world that are trying to create something similar. One I came over was actually in the Philippines, because sorry, the problem there was that only 44% of all Filipinos were utilizing bank accounts, even though that number has been growing quite a while in the last decade. It is still hampered by some inefficient mechanisms for checking the identity and the history of new account applicants. So, of course, the troubles regarding to know your customer laws in the way that some data is in digital form, some is not, and you have to, for the Filipinos, have to basically fill out the same forms over and over again. So, to try to solve this, the Bankers Association of Philippines, together with some Hyperledger members and a technology consultancy company, they created a proof of concept and then a trial exercise to build a prototype that implemented self-sovereign identity. And the idea was to streamline the onboarding of new accounts and allow customers to be, again, more in control of their identity and not having to fill out a lot of the same forms over and over again. You can just reuse data, for example. So this is still in trial phase, of course, in the very small tests, but they say that this could serve as a potential nationwide self-sovereign identity system in the Philippines, which I thought was pretty cool. And the last one of the frameworks is what's called Hyperledger Burrow, which was contributed by Monax about a year ago. I feel like this project has been a bit trouble in the way that it has gone on through some code changes. Monax itself has pivoted quite a bit what they're actually providing, and that shows in the project itself. But what it's supposed to be is a licensed EVM, Ethereum virtual machine based smart contract machine reading format, and it's supposed to now tie into what the Monax called agreement network. So basically it's supposed to be a smart contract layer on top of other blockchains. They've created, for the moment, the integration with Ethereum, meaning that you can create smart contracts in Solidity and run it on the EVM. And it's also supposed to be very fast and light and a single process system, but run in a permission setting separate from the Ethereum global ledger. So this project, I feel, is still a bit undefined, and it seems like Monax isn't doing that much work upgrading it anymore. But maybe when Monax is trying to get a bit more, stable ground under themselves, they might be able to fix this up a bit. But I like the idea. there is a lot of interest from both the lawyer world and from the rest of the business world. How do we actually create smart contracts? And when we create them, are they legally binding? Can they actually be used in a business setting? Can we take this to court? And that was the problem that Monex actually tried to solve. But they've run into some troubles, I would say. And now going over towards more the tools. So now I've talked a bit about the frameworks themselves, the full ledger implementations, consensus algorithms, and different use cases for them. These are more tools that are supposed to help create ledger deployments. The first one and the maybe most useful one is Hyperledger Composer, which is a business modeling tool, basically, open development toolset, which includes what they call a playground, a modular playground, and some other suite of tools, client libraries, command line utilities, and some code generation. But it basically allows application developers or architects to start developing blockchain application quite easily. Set it up and running, engage quickly, and test out their business network. It actually allows them to create full stack solutions. That means business logic that runs on a ledger. They allow, for example, just to simulate the ledger directly in the browser, or you can interact with an underlying Hyperledger deployment. At the moment, I think it only supports a Hyperledger Fabric deployment, but I think the plan is to support all the different Hyperledger frameworks going forward. The next tool is Hyperledger Cello, which basically provides deployment as a service. As I mentioned, these different Hyperledger frameworks are based around managing Docker APIs and blockchain clusters. So it basically brings the effort of creating, managing, and terminating blockchains on various cloud infrastructures and makes it much easier. You're supposed to be able to, even if your blockchain runs on your own machine or virtual machine, or if it runs in several different containers in different cloud environments, it's supposed to be able to control it through Hyperledger Cello. And if you compare it with if you combine it with Hyperledger Explorer, which I will talk about next, you can actually have a full system status. You can scale the amount of chain numbers that you have. For example, if you want to easily add more validator node, for example, that is something that can be done through Hyperledger Cello. Hyperledger Explorer is basically an Explorer tool. It's a tool that allows you to manage a blockchain's contents itself. It shows some rough numbers on the transaction history, for example. It can show you how many transactions are happening per second, what are the latest hashes that has been added to the blockchain itself, and some other interesting numbers. So it's basically a visualization tool. Back in my previous job, when we created some blockchain-based proof of concept, Hyperledger Explorer was very useful to see if transactions were actually going through, in what point if they stopped, where was the bottleneck, for example, or where was the hang-up. The second to last tool is Hyperledger Quilt, which was contributed by Entity Data and Ripple. And Ripple has actually created what they call the Interledger protocol. And Quilt is a Java implementation of this protocol. It's basically a protocol for payments that can be routed across different payment systems. And that means it's supposed to mean payment system in the world of different blockchain-based ledgers, but also more traditional payment systems or payment rails that we're already using. The idea is here that you should have secure transfer between ledgers and allow anyone with accounts on two different ledgers to create a connection between them. So this can be quite a necessary tool. I think this is a step in the right direction of creating a more interoperable blockchain world, where if you have several different ledgers with different assets running on them, there's a way to create a connection between them and perform an asset transfer. So the last tool is Hyperledger Caliper. It's a framework benchmarking tool that can be used together with Hyperledger Explorer. And basically the three main reasons that this was created is that there wasn't any good general purpose benchmarking tools available for blockchains. If there were often with no source code, or at least no open source code. You got some maybe performance reports, but you don't know how did they actually get these numbers. There's a lot of blockchains out there that might say we have 1,000 transactions per second or 1,000,000 transactions per second, but they don't have any justification for how do they actually get this number, in what test environment was this done, on how many different machines, and on where they globally distributed. So Caliper is trying to solve this general problem. There's also no really common definition of performance indicators. We have transaction per seconds, but as I just said, there isn't really a good way to say in what test environment is a transaction per second number valid. So basically the idea here is to create commonly accepted benchmark use cases. So Hyperledger Caliper is capable of producing reports containing various performance indicators, where TPS is one of them, but also transaction latency, resource utilization in terms of hardware. And you can also publish the results and the test environments themselves, or documentation about the test environment itself. So the tool is not intended to make judgments, but rather to be used by other Hyperledger projects as they build out their frameworks. So, towards the end of the presentation here, which is good because my voice is given out. So something that I actually am hoping for this group going forward is to be a bit of a community for technical resources and non-technical resources that are interested in Hyperledger technologies themselves. This is the first meetup. We're still trying to figure out some of the cranks here. As you can hear, my voice isn't that good. I've been sick for a week, and I thought this would go fine, but a bit of a trouble. But the idea is here for this to be like a place where people can meet up and discuss the Hyperledger technologies. The plan is going forward to create some workshops where we can actually have either hackathons or some training workshops where people can get some hands-on experience with, for example, Hyperledger Fabric or any of the other frameworks. And they are also hoping, we've been in a bit of a talk to see if we can invite startups or other companies that are using Hyperledger technologies and come talk about what they did to implement, what kind of troubles did they run into, and some other technical challenges. And also, of course, Hyperledger want new developers to start interacting with the project. So there's a lot of bug database one can start working on. There's a global Rocket chat where there's a lot of Hyperledger discussions going on. And of course, there's working group meetings for those who are, if the people get really seriously interested. So the last bit here is Hyperledger is, if anyone is using Hyperledger and building something, they encourage people to send them their stories. You can get, Hyperledger t-shirts. But also you can be tracked on their website, for example. So yeah, that was basically the end of my presentation. Thank you for coming.
Good job with that voice.
Oh yeah, that was a bit of a trouble out there.
So the word is free. So I'm interested in hearing about I've been talking to some of you while you're here. But what would you like to get out of this meetup group? How many are consider themselves developers in like hands-on workshop? Seriously? interests? Are there external resources? Someone who would like to have a common talk for us? If someone wants to speak, you can use this and it will get on the tape. Anyone? No?
I think it's pretty new at the moment. It's a bit of a start. I think, as I mentioned at the start, one of the reasons why both of us have been wanting to start this is that blockchain for enterprise is a concept that I think will become more and more important in the coming years, and there will need communities where developers can talk and discuss challenges that they might face. At the moment, I would say that permissionless blockchains like Ethereum and Bitcoin are more popular, and there's more, let's say, people that flock to it because it's maybe more sexy or maybe easier to make money or get funding for your startup. But I think also in the business world there will be quite some interest here in blockchain developers in the years going forward. I know IBM, for example, is saying they're hiring like 1,000 new people just to work with blockchain, and I think to be able to put blockchain developer on your CV will be something that will get you a lot of calls. So I think that is the hope for this meetup group going forward. We'll see if we can do some things to grow the community a bit more, get more people to meet up. Maybe try it a little bit earlier. We tried 6 o'clock because people get time to go off work, but maybe it should be a bit earlier so that people can come straight from work. We'll see.
Yep. And regarding IBM, I think those are one of the actors that we'd like to have come in for maybe to do a technical workshop for us with the Hyperledger Fabric. That's my sort of top of my list of things we were trying to do after the summer. To have like a hands-on technical workshop how to create your own blockchains using Hyperledger Fabric. Yeah.
Is this recording? Peter, you mentioned that the IBM
but basically, IBM blockchain as it is right now is mostly based around Fabric and Composer. Those are tools that has been built, I would say, largely by IBM. There's been contributors from other companies or freelance developers. But these are the two major frameworks that IBM is situated around. Though IBM has said that they don't have full control over Fabric anymore, so if major changes are happening, they will adapt to it. So they're basically, since it's under the Apache 2.0 license, they're free to change the framework itself and resell it in ways they want.
Okay.
So yeah, it's basically the source code is open source, but IBM is taking it and packaging it in their own ecosystem and selling it basically.
Okay. I mentioned out there that I'm from the bank DNB. We have 7 different projects based on blockchain now. One we signed with Norblock a month ago. They're using Hyperledger Fabric. Yeah. We signed with IOTA 1.5 months ago, but it was published a few weeks ago. It's a completely different blockchain-based or DLT. We signed with BitSpace a few weeks ago. They're using EOS, which means we do too much and too many different technology right now. We're struggling to find out what is it that we should focus on in the future. Hyperledger might be. So I had a meeting with Marta from Hyperledger a few weeks ago. Just because it might be focusing a little bit more about Hyperledger.
Yeah, that's been the thing. There's so many different blockchain frameworks, and I think they're starting to be some consolidation, but it's still very much up in the air. That's why Hyperledger's focus so much on having these working groups where you like work, for example, for healthcare. You're seeing what is the actual problems in healthcare. Can we use any of the Hyperledger technologies and can it be incorporated? And they're trying to see if it actually fit for purpose. What I'm hoping that Fabric avoids, because at the moment Fabric is growing quite in like functionality, but that also means that it might become very cumbersome to use. I hope not, because if you're trying to do or be a tool for everything, then it's very hard to actually solve a problem, maybe potentially. But in generally, I would say Fabric is one of the more better created enterprise blockchains out there at the moment. In the way that it has support, a lot of new features are being added. I remember back in my previous job when we used Hyperledger version 0.6, it's completely different than what it is now, 1.5 years later, in the terms of functionality, stability. Like back then at version 0.6, things didn't work most of the time, but now it's actually, you can actually build systems that run stable if you know what you're doing. So I would say Hyperledger is a pretty good bet at the moment for certain things, but we still say we're not in that phase where we know if you want to build a financial application that does this and this, then you use this specific framework. I don't feel like we're there yet. Yeah, I think you can build something that is almost as good with some of the other projects that you just mentioned as well. So yeah, it's the problem with being one of the first adopters. It's you will get things wrong. Definitely.
Okay, we have two more, Corda and something else. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Corda is also, of course, actually expected Corda to become open source under Hyperledger. If those who don't know, Corda is a framework built by a company called R3, which are creating what they call a financial grade ledger. So they're creating a DLT-based framework that is supposed to be mainly used in financial services. And it's built around, again, legal agreements and updating legal agreements between financial institutions. They actually were supposed to open source it on the Hyperledger last year, but I've heard some rumors there that they're keeping a lot of the code base for themselves. They're only open sourcing like the vanilla features, and that's one of the reasons they haven't been accepted into Hyperledger yet, but I don't know if that's true or not. But we'll see. Hopefully they will be open sourced as well. At least all of it will be open sourced.
How far they have gone with Iroha? So can we do it with this one?
No. How far they have gone with Iroha? So as if we consider the response time, for example, for mobile applications, so they must be faster enough. So.
Yeah, at least Iroha is the one that I found the least information about. It's relatively, it's actually been in Hyperledger for a while, but I don't feel like it's gained that much traction. It might be because, again, it's based on a Japanese, created by Japanese countries, Japanese companies. So we might not just have heard that much about it here. But I feel like, they've had a bit of trouble getting off the ground. That's why I think the project itself will be more libraries and frameworks that will be used by the other Hyperledger projects.
For example, if we compare with IOTA, for example, they are doing good.
Yeah,
they are things and stuff.
Doing a bit different. Of course, they have a different focus than what Iroha has. They're more of a IoT based system, and while Iroha seems, it seems like the libraries for mobile development are very good, but the consensus mechanism, I haven't really heard that much good things said about it, and it doesn't seem to be the blockchain itself, the underlying ledger seems to be not truly enterprise grade. Yeah. But that might change, but it might also not.
And one more thing, and the Fabric is now 1.1 version?
1.1.
Okay, yeah.
And they're supposed to now, they actually said that they've gotten to a point now where they're almost releasing a bit too fast. They can't quality control it well enough. So they're trying to hold back a little bit now, trying to create, I think they're supposed to set one one release per quarter is their current goal, but they might slow that a bit more down as well.
Yeah.
Between version 1.0 and 1.1, I think they used almost half a year. So yeah, I think that was a bit. Yeah, they need to figure out the timing basically. There is a lot of features that aren't needed, but they also need to test them properly and make sure that they actually are well and fit for purpose.
Anyone else?
Nope.
Okay.
Very much on time with what we're supposed to end as well.
Yeah,
So.
I'd just like to thank Peter once again for an excellent talk, and good luck with your voice. And please come back later.
Yeah.
I think we'll try to do a technical one next time, and maybe we'll do some more like this with more general talks.
Yeah. I'll also add the slides that I've used to the meetup group. I'll also add a link to the Hyperledger Rocket Chat if people want to join there. I know in Hyperledger, the meetup they've created in Stockholm, they created their own Slack group for the meetup. I think that we'll see if that is necessary. At the moment, we're not that many people, so we might just use the meetup group if we want to discuss. Of course, there's also the Blockchangers Slack. I think a lot of people that signed up already came from there, so it's also possible to have discussions there if people want to ask some questions.
Yeah, we'll definitely be checking out the Hyperledger Copenhagen and Stockholm meetups to see if there are any ideas for speakers and talks to have here as well.
Yeah, Lasse mentioned Nordblock, and they are one of the possible speakers that might come maybe towards in like autumn, maybe September or later.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.